The Gacha Wars. We have a copyright battle on YouTube between two creators, Mr. Pokke and Saintontas. We're going to get into that today, breaking down this copyright battle and what's going on there. Of course, on the legal mindset, we teach you to be your own judge. I'm Andrew Esquire, American attorney, and this is a Fast Facts video. And in this case, this is a case involving two different creators. Now, I'll introduce you to the first one. The plaintiff in this case is Mr. Pokke, a Singaporean Gacha content creator. So he is the plaintiff in this case because he's the one that actually struck the video. So he's the one that placed these strikes. So I'm going to put him in the plaintiff seat for today in the overall framing. And then the defendant is Saintontas. I'm going to call him Saint because I'm lazy, but he is the one whose video was indeed struck. So we've got Mr. Pokke versus Saint in this Gacha war. So Mr. Pokke and Saintontas are YouTube creators in the Gacha space. And of course, if you're in any space, particularly where you're talking about different games and you have a lot of different opinions, you're going to have disagreements. In fact, passionate disagreements over the new game. And specifically, this boils down to criticism over the new game, Arknight's Enfield, which just came out in January of this year. And of course, there's some pro, there's some anti here. And that's how this played out is, hey, one of them likes the game, one of them doesn't like the game. You know, the other one says, hey, you're a supporter of the game Wuthering Waves, so therefore you're not going to be a supporter of this new game. So there's an internal conflict here when it comes to that. And Mr. Pokke used that conflict and a bunch of quote unquote logical fallacies to mock Saintontas in his video, The Art of the Gacha War, to which Saintontas responded with his own video, The Tragic Downfall of Mr. Pokke, reviewing that video and rebutting that and kind of going through these things he calls logical fallacies and kind of making fun of him and also breaking those down in more of an analysis. And that video, The Tragic Downfall of Mr. Pokke, was indeed the one that Mr. Pokke ended up striking on YouTube after its release. So over here, we can see the evidence of the copyright strike right here, which says we received a copyright removal request for your video based on applicable copyright law. We removed your video. Your channel received a strike. If you get 3 copyright strikes, your channel, along with associated channels, will be removed, subject to removal. So this is very important to note. Obviously, if you are a person who is covering someone religiously and they are able to get 3 strikes on you, that's a way they can get you and get your channel removed. And some people can call that perhaps baiting. I guess if you're locked into a battle with somebody, this is something that can indeed happen. And over here, you see the remedies. Do nothing. Strike expires after 90 days. Request retraction or submit a counter notification. Deleting the video will not remove the strike. So those are your 3 options. So what happened? Mr. Pokke demands Saintontas give a public apology, delete all videos mentioning him, and never speak about him again. And I'm just going to say for demands, those specific demands, okay, maybe an apology, I understand. But if you're in a space where there's disagreement, where there's fighting, where there's back and forth, where you're going to get into this, this is better, this is not, and understand with these gacha games, they can have indeed very complex systems. And there's a lot of argument about value, about the value of pulls, about what system is best. Is it a complex system with a lot of characters or whatever else? You could argue about the art. You could argue about the models. There's a lot to argue about in the gacha space, and that kind of makes it ripe for conflict. So I think saying, hey, look, you're never going to make a video about somebody else in the space, kind of an unreasonable demand. However, Saintontas responds with a counter notice and said he hired H3. H3's lawyer, a very, very accomplished and successful copyright lawyer in the United States. And Mr. Pokke does go back and say he's committed to a lawsuit. We're going to look at those tweets. And allegedly, according to my information that I received, he hired a Singaporean lawyer. So we'll get into that being a little bit of a mistake. So over here, you can see Mr. Pokke's posts that say, at every point of the road, you had the option to take the better path for yourself and everyone around you. Now you believe hiring a lawyer to draft a counter notification, not a lawsuit, will give you legal grounds to steal my content. I am prepared to give you an actual lawsuit. Sleep well. Well, this is very interesting because it seems to me reading this tweet that he just doesn't understand how the system works. And an actual lawsuit, well, what are you going to do? Like, are you trying to sue under Singaporean law? It sounds like, because there's a big problem with that. And we're going to go into that. The next comment here is the aim for peaceful resolution or de-escalation has clearly been tossed out as seen from from his recent streams or videos. Saint, please do not treat my one act of kindness to you as a sign of weakness or bowing down for your forgiveness, stating the peaceful resolution is me leaving the space. In my act of absolute good faith and kindness, feeling sorry for what happened to you, you decided to weaponize it and paint me as a Gacha terrorist. When the time comes, I will quote you on your own words, no mercy. And a little bit of the context of this, there was a raid on some Discord servers with some illicit material that was posted. Now, that has nothing to do with the legal scenario, but some of that sentiment probably in there. So one thing I point out, de-escalation and peaceful resolutions are often the best result, not lawsuits, not going through the legal process. So anytime I see somebody throwing that out, I think they're really getting into an area that's over their heads. But let's get into the actual law and the way it breaks down with the YouTube system, because the YouTube system is very specific and it kind of covers the DMCA process. So when you have a YouTube copyright dispute, particularly one where you have a DMCA counter notification, proper venue, that's where the lawsuit is, where everything has to go down, is determined by US federal copyright law. And that doesn't matter where the parties are from. They can be from anywhere on the planet. Obviously, Mr. Pokke from Singapore, he could be from Mali, he could be from South Sudan, he could be from Argentina. It doesn't matter. You've got to apply US federal copyright law on a YouTube claim. Lawsuits must be brought in a federal court in the United States, a federal district court, regardless of where the parties reside. And when they are participating in the YouTube system, the notice and counter notice system, they're consenting to jurisdiction. So they're consenting to that US-based jurisdiction. Usually you're going to bring that case in the federal district where the defendant resides, or in the Northern District of California, because, well, that's where YouTube is, in the Northern District of California. So the foreign law here, really to examine this, US law is going to cover, since it's a US company. So Mr. Pokke, if he's talking about bringing a quote unquote real lawsuit and he's thinking about bringing a Singaporean lawsuit, well, that really is not going to apply US law, and it's not going to have an enforceable judgment, because you can go and have some sort of lawsuit, and some countries allow this. Different countries are different, but in some countries you might even be able to quote unquote bring a lawsuit against somebody. Maybe they don't show up or they don't even bother fighting it, and you get some sort of judgment in that country. So maybe you have a judgment in, let's say, Romania, right? But that will not necessarily be enforced in other countries. Most countries, many countries, will not enforce those, particularly as to civil judgments, because that law was not correctly applied. And in this case, it's very, very clear that US law has to be applied. So in order to prevent the lawsuit, and prevent everything from being reposted, because eventually he's filed a counter notice, right? So he's filed the intention, right, and the willingness to fight back through a lawsuit. You can repost that information after a 10 to 14 day DMCA window, right? And you've got to post proof that you have put your claim in US federal court and show that to YouTube. And if he's not able to do that, that's going to be a problem. Filing abroad, filing some Singaporean lawsuit is not going to meet the YouTube requirements. So then you get into, okay, so it's got to be in the US. Is it fair use? Now, this is a more complicated question. And without me picking apart the video and doing a hour-long or 2-hour-long review of a video that's been copyright struck and opening myself up to a copyright strike, we'll talk about it broadly. Fair use usually involves commentary and criticism. It's not enough to say, hey, I simply don't like critique. I don't like your talking about me. Therefore, you can't talk about me. That's not enough. Now, using someone's video, that does come in. Okay, you use someone's entire video. Is that transformative? Well, Saintontas and his position says he reacted for an hour and 22 minutes to a 20-minute video. Now, the judge could look at that differently, could say, well, you used all of it, or you didn't use clips, or whatever else. But there's a substantial amount that was added in terms of criticism and critique in response. The other thing they're going to look at is whether it's a market replacement for Mr. Pokke's original video. So let's look back to the Dirty Denims, Frogan and Casey Tron versus Ethan Klein. And did he make any statements saying, hey, I'm trying to steal viewers from Mr. Pokke, or this is intended as a replacement for Mr. Pokke? If he did, then that would be a problem. But if he was just issuing critique and commentary and without actively trying to to subvert that market, I think that the court might look at that a little bit more favorably on Saintontas' side. So as long as he wasn't going about that in a way akin to Denham's, Casey Tron, or Frogan, I think it might be looked more like critique. But of course, this is a thing with fair use. Different judges can weigh the factors differently. So there could be a judge that says, hey, I don't like that you use the entire video, or I think you shouldn't have used this particular portion of the video. It might weigh that differently. But I think overall, looking at that, the fair use factors on their face tend to lean towards Saint. So let's go to the judgment. In my judgment, Saintontas has the current advantage as an American with a U.S. lawyer when fighting a Singaporean Mr. Pokke in court. He's got to go and do all this work. He's got to hire the American lawyer. He's got to deal with U.S. law. And right now, it's not even clear whether he has re-engaged a U.S. lawyer instead of a Singaporean lawyer. And the fair use factors do lean in favor of Saint just broadly, but judges can rule differently and they can rule the way they want. So you've got to really leave the door open for anything to happen if it actually slugs out. Of course, that's very costly. And therefore, my really final conclusion is both of these parties, Mr. Pokke and Saint, are really better sitting down, calming down, and coming to a non-legal resolution. But I will say to Mr. Pokke, expecting one party not to ever comment on another again, saying, hey, don't talk about me again, keep my name out your mouth. That is not a reasonable expectation or generally an enforceable expectation on the internet, absent some other circumstance. This is not a situation where we're dealing with something like a death threat or a threat of physical harm, right? So this is a situation in which someone is giving critique. And if your position is, don't critique me ever again, generally that's not something that's going to be enforced or held up in court. But I want to know what you guys think about this and the Gacha war of Mr. Pokke versus Saintontas. Let me know in the comments below, and I'll catch you on the next.